It's no exaggeration to say that COVID-19 has overnight changed how we work. Businesses are facing unprecedented challenges, and sometimes tech isn't going to help. Unemployment rates are at the highest levels in a generation, and that is globally. So professionals need to remain relevant to help their organizations succeed, of course, but they also need to remain relevant in case they find themselves looking for a new opportunity. So in today's episode of the Go Beyond Disruption podcast, we'll explore how to remain relevant and marketable in uncertain times. Welcome to this weekly show from the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants, the unified voice of AICPA and CIMA. You can listen completely free on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or any podcast app, and get insights every week from inside the accounting and finance profession that help you stay ahead of the curve, whatever business you are in. You don't have to be an accountant or a finance professional to listen in and get good stuff from our episodes. Speaking of which, this episode is talking about keeping yourself marketable during an economic downturn. And I'm joined from our London office. I'm Kyle Hannon, by the way, joined by two people who bring two very complementary perspectives to one issue, and that is your career and how you can keep it on track when almost everything else seems to be going off the rails. Well, at least for now. My first guest, Beth Burke, is an experienced accounting and finance professional recruiter. She's a CPA and a CGMA. She's been self-employed for the best part of the last 2 decades, and she works as an independent recruiter based near Washington, D.C. She works with public accounting firms and organizations in various industries. She helps them identify and hire the right fit and focuses on roles seeking CPAs, as well as working to place financial, accounting, and operational professionals. We're also joined by the Executive Vice President for Engagement and Learning Innovation here at AICPA and CIMA, Clar Rosso. She leads the association's business development and channel teams and has helped develop and deliver the organization's future of learning vision. Claire also serves on the board of trustees at New York's Excelsior College. So upskilling and professional education is what she does, and that's exactly what we'll be talking about in this show. So thank you, Beth and Claire, for joining us on this episode of the podcast. Beth, let's start with you. I know you've a broad-based business background that includes public accounting, consulting. So you've worked for EY and KPMG, as well as the American Cancer Society. And you've also worked in business development and recruiting. Being involved in CPA-related professional associations and being published by publications, including our very own Journal of Accountancy, is why we are talking to you. Tell me a bit more about the work you do as a recruiter and how you do it.
I started off in public accounting in an audit role and also did a rotation in tax. It was during my few years in public accounting earlier on in my career that I met a recruiter. And that recruiter had also worked in public accounting as a CPA. And in meeting me, she thought I'd be a great recruiter. However, I did not take her advice back then. I then left public accounting to go work for a financial services company, in which I served in an internal audit role. As a result, I worked with many people in various departments and became friendly and networked with them as well. And each time a few of them would go look to leave to get a new job, I'd ask how their interview went, and they'd come back and say that they were told they were overpaid for their skill set because a lot of them had tailor-made skills for our organization. It was back then that I thought to myself, boy, I'm never going to let this happen to me in my career. So that was a very valuable lesson. I then learned another very valuable lesson when 9/11 happened and I didn't have a job. Fortunately, I had always kept my skills up to date and marketable as well. And I also had a network of professional and personal contacts. Because of this, I was able to thrive during an uncertain time as well as further on in my career up until now. I believe that recruiting has allowed me to play to my strengths in terms of not only what I like to do, but from my strong skill sets and talents as well. As a result, I went into recruiting on my own as an independent recruiter where I work by myself, although I do collaborate at times with other recruiters. And I work really hard to make sure that my employers and those job seekers are the right fit for each other and allow them to play to their strengths as well.
Claire, you joined the AICPA and CIMA a little while back. What brought you here?
Thanks, Kyle. And Beth, by the way, it's great to be here with you. I actually joined AICPA in 2013, but that is after almost 2 decades of working with the accounting and finance profession in a state-based professional association. And I was attracted to the AICPA by the opportunity to work globally to influence the competency of the profession. And so I joined to lead the member learning and competency team back there in 2013.
Let's talk about how things have changed in the last couple of years in the profession, because of course, if you recruit into it, which is what Beth does, one sees it from one perspective. But when you work with so many people, in addition to being an employer, someone who works with recruiters from time to time, someone who deals with people coming into the association, as well as with the upskilling of your staff, as well as helping people within a much wider community, that is something that Claire is going to be talking about. But of course, talking about the work we do, it's not the work that we're used to when it comes to what we're looking at with the pandemic at the moment. Setting the scene, it's early May 2020. We're heading into a spring like absolutely no other. Claire, we talked about working at the association, but you're not there right now, are you? I mean, how's where you are right now different from where you'd normally be at this time of a week?
So I'm still in North Carolina, but instead of Durham, I'm at my home in Chapel Hill. And instead of sitting at a open workspace in our North Carolina office where I can have serendipitous encounters with team members to collaborate and innovate, I currently am sharing my home office space with a foosball table and a treadmill. And so when I need to have those serendipitous encounters, and this is probably an oxymoron, they need to be planned. So collaborating and innovation is still happening. It's just not quite as spontaneous as it was before.
Beth, what about you? What's changed during this pandemic lockdown?
Well, I've been working from home since 2005. So in terms of having a home work setup, nothing's changed for me. And for the most part, my daily routine hasn't changed a lot either, other than maybe not having to get up as early because the phone is not ringing as much. I would have normally been out and about attending conferences and networking events. However, due to this pandemic, many of them were either canceled or postponed, or many of them were brought online. So I've definitely been attending far more webinars and online events than before.
And I am working from my home too on the west coast of England, overlooking the Bristol Channel towards Wales, which, by the way, is the country, not the ocean creature, obviously. COVID-19 has completely changed the way my guests are working, the way I'm working, the way we're all working now. Possibly a permanent change. So, Beth, what's changed the professional world of accounting and finance recruitments at the moment?
Well, I think it's a little too soon to tell exactly of what will play out from all this, especially in terms of whether people will be going back to work or having flexible schedules or possibly even working part-time. Up until recently, in speaking with a lot of my CPA firm clients or professionals that work at them, I hadn't heard of any of the CPA firms letting professional staff go, be furloughed or laid off. However, I'd heard much more of that in industry type jobs. So I think in terms of what may come about, starting to come about if people are in fact still working full time, is that they may get a reduction in their salary or a reduction in their hours per week if they're paid by the hour. And they have to be prepared for that. I also feel that a lot of us will not really know what this is going to look like, especially if you live in an area that relies upon public transportation. I live in a suburb of Washington, D.C., and a lot of people rely on the metro to get to work or buses. So it'll take a little bit of time to figure out how people will be able to use public transportation to get into D.C. or other parts in and around Maryland and Northern Virginia. I also don't know what that means in terms of how offices are physically set up, or if they're going to limit how many people come in each day and have different schedules than they once had. Some people may have jobs that end up staying at home remotely permanently. And for those who don't like to work at home, they may have to consider that as well in terms of whether they stay with their company or look for a new job. So although it's a little too soon to tell, I do think there are definitely more layoffs to occur. And not all industries, obviously, healthcare might be different in their hiring and those in the logistics. But I think one needs to look at, in terms of as an accounting role, how large their department is and figure out what their role is to try to anticipate possibly whether you too may have to be looking for a job.
So let's look at things from the other perspective. Clar Rosso, from the perspective of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants, give us a sense of the size of the community, the membership that you're able to get feedback from. What are you seeing from the professions on the global scale that gives you a sense of how things may be changing for practices or finance teams?
The association, AICPA and CIMA combined, our members and students represent about 667,000 individuals across 170 some countries. So we do have a really great global perspective and are able to both formally and informally take the pulse of what's going on. And I would say it depends. It's sort of all over the place right now. And I think we're seeing some actions that are related to what you might see in any economic downturn, where organizations are really focused on their liquidity. What do I need to do on a temporary basis to remain viable as a business? And so they're taking small steps like freezing open positions and slowing down hiring that they're doing. We've only really heard about measures being taken on an interim basis as opposed to anything on a large scale happening in terms of disruption of jobs within the public accounting profession since it started. So if I look at our global jobs board that we have, what we've seen in the past month is about a 25% reduction of job postings. Although we still have about 10,000 jobs posted on the site. So recruiting has not stopped entirely. We are seeing that critical high value roles are being posted and hiring is happening in those industries, as Beth referred to, that are really thriving during this time. What we're seeing more of is just that slowdown of kind of non-business critical roles. But I think as businesses emerge from that, focus on what do I need to do? How am I going to stay in business? To really thinking about who do we want to be to succeed in the future as they pivot on their strategies and priorities. I believe that that's going to bring with it a new wave and a different wave of hiring. So different kinds of roles. But I think that'll be dependent on when businesses are ready to prioritize that strategically, as well as in each geography, what's happening with the economy.
Sure. So we can't expect in a period of disruption that the consequence will be anything other than disruptive. And you've spoken a lot about disruption as well as finance transformation in previous episodes of our podcast, as well as across other online media. And you've often spoken about technology changing the way that these hiring practices, especially those in accounting and finance, actually work. So do you have a sense of whether this COVID-19 pandemic will actually speed up the adoption of some of those technologies?
Absolutely. I mean, as you inferred, we have never talked about digital transformation as a case of if. It's always been a case of when. And I think the pandemic has created the incentives for businesses to transform more rapidly. If I use just one example, and that would be automation or robotic process automation, automation can minimize disruption to a business. And as businesses start to emerge, they're going to be focused on how do we minimize future disruptions? Because I don't think anyone thinks that this incident or the pandemic that we're experiencing right now is going to be the only global disruption of its type in the next few years.
The thing is, every time things change, we seem to have more tools at our fingertips to be able to cope, to accommodate, to adapt, or in some ways to actually make something new happen with the tools that we hadn't paid much attention to. I was speaking to a podcast guest the other day who said they hardly ever use the phone because they always have all these other technologies available. But now they're starting to actually pick that thing up and talk to people again. Some people are saying that they're slowing down, but while things seem to be changing, technology is incredibly important now and in the future, especially to job candidates. So let's look at the recruitment of those candidates. Beth, What are the technical skills that recruiters into the profession have always looked for on a CV or resume? And what do you think they will continue to look for in the future?
Well, first of all, not everybody includes specific technology skills or software application skills on their CVs, nor on LinkedIn either. So it's hard to tell what skills they have at times without making assumptions, especially in situations where I have clients that may seek out specific software, ERP or business intelligence in order to be hired versus a preferred skill set.
So are you saying that they've got the skill, but they just haven't bothered to tell anyone about it on their CV?
So you definitely need to state it on your CV. And the other thing, too, is I think Excel skills are definitely something that most of the roles I recruit for require, unless they're larger companies, medium to larger companies that require more robust type software. I think what's in line with what Claire was stating, based upon what's going on, if companies, especially some of the smaller ones, never really engaged in doing budgeting, forecasting, modeling, or data analysis, now would be a great time to start because there's a lot more needing to look at to the future of how they're doing today, how do they get there tomorrow. And I think anyone who's gotten involved in that type of skill set, regardless of whether they use Excel or other software, definitely needs to put that on their resume. And LinkedIn as well.
The tech skill that a recruiter will always expect to see is that someone can remember to actually write stuff down if they've done it. Okay. So, Claire, going back to your point about the adoption of new technologies a little earlier, we've often heard, especially now, that using tech to deliver remote audits means that will now require even clearer communication between clients and CPAs. Now, obviously, that's more than just soft skills. I've heard you talk about the top 10 future skills that we're going to need, and you've quoted the World Economic Forum list. What are those skills?
Yeah, that's great. And I think it relates to the fact that nobody's looking for skills in isolation anymore, right? They're looking for them in context. So the World Economic Forum regularly publishes a list of skills that employers are looking for, and these are the 2022 skills. And those are analytical thinking and innovation, active learning, creativity, originality and initiative, technology design and programming, critical thinking and analysis, complex problem solving, leadership and social influence, emotional intelligence, reasoning, problem solving and ideation, and systems analysis and evaluation. It's a bit of a shift from asking for tax and audit skills.
And they don't mention Excel in there, do they?
No, they don't.
Okay, well, perhaps there's a number 11 that we need in our context, but we'll make sure we include a list to those top 10 future skills in the links, and that'll be in the show notes to this episode. While we're on the subject of lists, Beth, I'll ask you this one. How often do your candidates find new positions internally rather than always looking somewhere else outside the company?
I would say in general, most job seekers, when they come to me for help, and I ask if they've looked internally first, tend to say no. I think for a lot of people, they're afraid of possibly their current boss finding out that they want to transfer to another business unit or department, or maybe they just want a new supervisor, and it might be easier to leave versus not leave. And this is where I think networking or getting to work with other people in other departments comes in handy, because I've experienced this myself earlier in my career, and where I was approached by a head of another business unit to come join his department. So I got to know who he was, and I would not have approached him directly because the boss that I worked for was the CFO, and I knew his personality. He wouldn't be very happy for me to leave his department. He was very pleased with my work. But when all was said and done, what the company realized, especially my CFO, me being in a new position was a win-win for the company as well as for me. So it ended up being a great decision. And I think job seekers should take that into consideration more.
So you say there are opportunities much closer to home. Is that right?
Yes. There are opportunities in front of them if you can get yourself noticed and find mentors and have various skills that makes you very valuable to your employer.
So let me ask you for that list. What are some of the top ways that an employee, someone already working inside a company, can add value to their current employer?
Well, I think they can take a lead on a project or spearhead a project, come up with new ideas to help the workflow today, especially helping to train other people either within your department or another department, possibly participating in helping to onboard staff and working in conjunction with HR. Maybe you have a sales department once people can start traveling again and having expenses to submit. Maybe someone from the accounting department needs to come in and work with them to help explain the process to get reimbursed, as an example. I think for those who've been waiting to get recognized or to be promoted, now is not the time to be humble or shy. I think one should raise their hand and ask to participate in a committee or task forces or create one, maybe addressing your department's future plans, including disaster recovery and business interruption, or somehow get involved with a company's strategic plan. And I wouldn't overlook someone's personal interests and hobbies outside of work as well, or volunteer experiences. Sometimes bringing that part of yourself to your organization helps you get noticed, and helps you get that next promotion because somebody saw a different side of you that they didn't get to see on the job. I mean, think about how many organizations during this pandemic are having Zoom happy hours on Friday afternoons with either within their company or their departments. Seems to be very popular these days.
Oh, yeah. I'm on at least 3 of those. I've even signed up to a couple of virtual happy hours. Not quite as happy as the real thing, but it's better than nothing, I must say, even virtually. You did mention that you've got to get yourself noticed. And obviously, noticing the options that your employer gives you to develop inside an organization is important. There are often opportunities, mentoring schemes, etc., that are already there. You've got to pay attention to those. And that's why I'd like to bring you in here, Claire. I mean, you lead people. You need a lot of them. How do you help your teams develop their skills within the organization? And how does a company encourage career progression and learning on the job so that all staff know that they can create opportunities for themselves?
I think what our team does is actually transferable to any organization. I place, and our organization places, a lot of importance on the personal and professional development of our people. We know that helps create job satisfaction, and it's good for the organization too. So what we do is we do engage in formal learning, right? And our team has access to all of the AICPA and CIMA learning, which is really broad and deep. So it provides lots of different kinds of opportunity. We also actively engage in cross-training activities and stretch assignments. So as much as Beth was talking about volunteering for that, we're also trying to create those opportunities for team members.
When you talk about stretch assignments, for people who've never heard that phrase before, you're not talking about office yoga, are you?
No, but wouldn't that be interesting? I think Zoom office yoga is going on nowadays.
They heard it here first. What exactly do you mean when you talk about something like a stretch assignment?
Something outside of what your day-to-day role is that might either be a level above you or in a different area of the organization, but really perhaps speaks to the core competencies you already bring to work and participate in that. And for me, my personal best stretch assignment I ever had in my life is I started my career as a communications professional. And as I evolved, I did lots of different things, but my best stretch assignment was when I volunteered for my organization to put a new CRM in place. And it was nothing I had ever done, but really I had that core skill set of managing change, leading people, understanding details, critical thinking, problem solving. And those kinds of skill sets were transferable from what I was doing to this technology project. So that's my example of what a stretch assignment might be. That was a pretty big one, but
yeah, but surely you can't ignore the responsibility of the individual. Of course, we all want to get new roles at some stage, and we need to make sure that we're ready for them. We're telling people that we're ready for it. But obviously, as senior leadership, it's not the wrong thing to do to be helping your own staff upskill, even if it does mean that they'd be better candidates for roles outside the organization, is it? I mean, how would senior leadership encourage the mindset all the way through an organization where it's okay to be marketing yourself internally? There must be a good way of keeping a balance so that people avoid the danger of being so self-focused that they get up people's noses and actually find themselves out there having to look for another job because they were so self-promoting that no one wanted them around.
Right. Right. Well, I personally think, first of all, it really does come from a stated, continually reinforced by your action commitment to that we are here for our people and their personal and professional development, whether it's inside this organization or ultimately leads to roles outside the organization. But I think on an individual basis, I agree. I would not be so keen on the person who's constantly telling me how great they are. I want to see how great they are through their actions. Right. So my recommendation is if you want to be noticed internally is understand your organization, understand its strategic priorities, its objectives, and look for ways that you and your team, and when I say and your team, I don't mean necessarily that you have to be the leader of a team. You can be the member of a team, right? But how can you and your team help your organization achieve those objectives more effectively and more efficiently? And then volunteer, like share your ideas. Nobody's going to accept all your ideas, but share your ideas, volunteer to do it. For me, nothing slows career progression like the individual who wants to be promoted before they do new work. So you actually have to be willing to do the work before you get the title. Again, I would just focus on the team. And one kind of final thought in this space is Agile methodologies are becoming really popular outside of just software development. And it's all about what are those things that you can do rapidly to show incremental progress that can be built upon. So I think like when you think about doing something to support the organization, it doesn't have to be big and huge. It can be small and you can build on it incrementally.
Great advice. Now let's step outside the enterprise for a minute and look at things from the perspective of a recruiter trying to place people inside a corporate. Beth, for businesses that are hiring, and you mentioned earlier that you've been having a look at job ads, you've been having a look at what opportunities are available right now, and you talked about the skills that employees are looking for. Do you think that these will be the same skills that they'll be looking for in the future? Or do you see some really big changes ahead that you're starting to see reflected in the adverts that are out there right now?
Well, I think we may need to revisit this in the future. However, I will say even those smaller clients that I've worked with, smaller businesses that may be less technology savvy, with the pandemic, I'm sure many of them had to adapt quickly to put some of their applications available online for dial-in, VPN, to access them remotely, because a lot of them didn't necessarily have the tools or the software to be able to do that without requiring someone to go into the office. So I think regardless of whether somebody was anticipating that change now or in the future, that has forced companies to really look at the technology. And I think that will continue to evolve over time as well. So technology, I believe, and depending on the industry and the role, is definitely going to play a large part. But what I think is also equally important, is, and you mentioned about job postings, is to take a look at what is being advertised in companies, either on their websites or just through the ads on LinkedIn or Indeed or whatever other online tools there are in other countries. I think it's important to take a look at if you can find out what skills they're looking for, both technically, technologically, and soft skills wise, and figure out where are you today and how do you get there tomorrow. And I would suggest that if you are actively in the job market now, or even are thinking about switching to a different industry or different type of role, that you may want to spend 30 minutes or so each week reading through job postings and either, again, through targeted companies, reading newsletters, podcasts, attending webinars. There's a lot of information out there you can get and glean from in terms of what's being looked upon as a favorable skill by employers, just from reading some online articles in and of themselves. And of course, the AICPA is a great resource resource for information as well.
Let me actually find someone from the AICPA and ask for information. We happen to have someone right here. Clar Rosso, is the AICPA seeing any global indicators or any regional, wider scale differences in the things that employers may be looking for after the pandemic eases? Because, of course, you have a global footprint. So what are you seeing there?
Actually, I would say what we are seeing is quite consistent globally. I think there's going to be some nuances, as you would expect of coming out of an economic downturn, right? But I think globally we're hearing some very consistent things. And there's an important point I want to make. We did some research on finance transformation with KPMG recently, and one of the things that we found in that is that while about 34% of organizations say they don't feel like they have the skills they need in sort of that digital infrastructure and implementation space, the vast majority of those, their preference is to upskill or reskill existing employees, right? So opportunities, even though the organizations need to evolve their skill sets, there's still most organizations are very committed to working with the employees they have. And only a small percentage, like a fifth, so 20%, say that they would go outside to look for the skills. So what are the kinds of things that we are hearing? I'd say it sort of falls into two buckets. One, going back to those World Economic Forum 2022 skills, it's that analytical thinking, critical thinking, problem solving. I tend to think of those as less teachable skills or less easily teachable competencies. So I think folks are looking for that. And so making sure that you're being really clear on those places where you excel is really important. And then the other areas where I see trends and lots of interest is, of course, around data, right? People want to be able to use data better. There's a huge performance gap between what CEOs of organizations expect and want and feel their organization needs to be able to do around data and what's actually happening. So I think anything in the data analytics area is very important. Cybersecurity was important before the pandemic and everything became remote, and it's even more important now. So how you fit in the cybersecurity space will be very different depending on your career, but there is opportunity in all those spaces. Obviously, we are seeing lots of conversation about enterprise risk management. And I think enterprise risk management is both about assessing risk, but I also see it as an opportunity to think strategically about opportunities and growth, right? So that sort of strategic thinking skill set where you can focus on business models, changing business models and driving value. Those are really important. And I'm going to throw one more in and I'll stop because I could go on all day. Automation. I mean, what we talked about earlier, I think because of organizations wanting to increasingly automate those things they can to free up their people's time so they can focus on more strategic, higher value activities, that's going to be key.
Thanks, Claire. Now, let's bring it back to where we are at the moment. May 2020. We're recording this episode of the Go Beyond Disruption podcast in spring for some, autumn for others. But whatever the weather, it is always job hunting season, isn't it, Beth? As a recruiter, what practical steps should candidates be taking right now? You've got some opinions about self-audits and some advice about using LinkedIn. Where should we be starting?
Well, I think for starters, someone should try to determine where they are today and where they're trying to get to. Keeping in mind things are continuing to change, so you probably need to self-audit at least once a year. And if you're actively looking for a job, or you may need to do it a little more frequently. But I think you need to determine also what are your strengths in terms of your technical and soft skills, and what comes naturally to you and what doesn't, and what is it that you need to do to change to thrive in either your current role or to possibly a new role you might be seeking. Many jobs over the years, and Claire mentioned about automation, were very structured and very routine. Well, those types of jobs are going away a lot due to automation. And as a result, people need to be able to think about things and all the other different criteria that Claire had mentioned earlier on as well. I think it's important also to get constructive feedback and criticism that either you get at work or at home and figure out, how does that play into possibly your strengths and your weaknesses? Because I think understanding those is extremely important. And then one can use other tools too, such as a predictive index or Myers-Briggs, to figure out possibly a better idea to assess who you are. So you kind of need to do your field work and your findings to determine where is there a skills gap. And you'll need to assess this each year because of the fact that things are constantly changing. And as far as where you go to get that information, there's a lot of training going on nowadays, including on LinkedIn. And you can also use LinkedIn to look at other people's profiles to see what they have on their profiles as to be in the type of roles you may be seeking yourself. And I think it's really important to take a look at yourself, to summarize your strengths, your weaknesses, and how do you get from point A to Z? And there might be many steps in between. And what skills do you need to learn each step of the way, so you hopefully can end up in a position that you really enjoy and can add value to not only yourself, but to the company that you work for.
And I would imagine balancing being honest, trying to get as much in as possible, but being focused, keeping it to a fairly short, punchy summary of what you're best at. That's a tough call. Claire, from the learning and qualifications perspective, given that upskilling and reskilling is so crucial right now, what do you suggest people start with when it comes to online resources? Perhaps tell us what may be available from the AICPA.
Sure. We have a lot of resources right now. And I think one of the big things to know is what's going on in the current environment, right? So we have a ton of free content in our coronavirus resource centers, cimaglobal.com/coronavirus and AICPA.org/coronavirus. An amazing amount of resources. They're both focused on technical parts of the profession so that you can be up to speed on the latest and greatest, but also we have some series that are really focused about thinking about running your business and how your business might need to change. And I think just watching those would be really useful to thinking about might I apply that to my current business. Also, we have coming up our Engage 2020, which last year was a very large live event. And this year we are moving it to a virtual year-long experience the second week of June. Perhaps you can put this in the notes. We are running the first part of Engage, and it's going to be free to everyone, and talk about some current issues going on out there in the marketplace that I think will be really interesting. And then our main event is in the third week of July, and then we will continue to provide relevant information all year long. We have a fantastic human intelligence series. One of the other resources that we provide that really helps you demonstrate your expertise in a meaningful way in the marketplace is we do issue a lot of digital badges associated with the completion of learning. And I think that that's really important in this virtual environment. Beth has talked about LinkedIn a lot. It means something to show that not just that you've taken any old class, but that respected authority has issued a badge based on the learning that you've engaged in.
We'll definitely have links to all of that in the show notes. Beth, what would you suggest as a resource for someone who may be starting perhaps less from the online perspective, but trying to develop themselves? They're not going for digital badges. They just want to do something perhaps a little more personal.
Well, there's certainly no lack of webinars and seminars online these days in various topics. I mean, a lot of here in the U.S., there's several that provide free CPE on a multitude of topics. I think even some of the community colleges, when they've all gone online, and some of them offer possibly a certificate program to work towards. You don't necessarily need to get the certificate or do it over a period of time. So I think you need to look to your local community colleges. Also, I would think that you might even be able to do a person-to-person form of learning by reaching out to peers, either others who are in the same organization as you in terms of a professional association or internally or friends, however you want to find that person to learn from, and ask if they wouldn't mind spending some time with you and carve out a schedule, say once a week, and to work on ways to improve, especially on the soft skills side of the equation. Finding a mentor or even hiring a coach potentially is important right now to get your soft skills up to speed as well, because it sounds like they will be far more in demand than they have been over the years, especially in being able to explain the data that one is being asked to look at and analyze and be able to share internally with those around you.
Now, we'll wrap up with a little exercise I've recently started doing on the podcast, and that is to create a Go Beyond Disruption t-shirt. And you can put one slogan, one saying on the front of that t-shirt, which contains an insight from our guests. So, Clar Rosso, if I were to put one piece of advice on the Go Beyond Disruption t-shirts that would help a job seeker upskill and market themselves beyond this disruption, what would it say on that t-shirt?
Okay. It would have a visual, though, associated with it. Sorry to be complex, but it would say, find your sweet spot. And it would show a Venn diagram of 3 circles. And 1 is what you love. 2 is what you're good at. And 3 is what drives value in the marketplace. And that intersection, that sweet spot.
That would have to be in a different color, wouldn't it? Okay, I'm going to have to put in for budget to cover the multicolored printing, but I'm sure we could find someone in the association who could sign that off. Beth, what about you? If we were to put the Go Beyond Disruption t-shirt together and put one piece of advice on it, what would you suggest we put there?
I would say I've gotten out of my comfort zone and I embrace change with lots of exclamation points.
Love it. Thank you, Beth Burke and Clar Rosso. And that's it for this episode. Our show notes will have links to all the resources we've talked about. To view them, just click on the info icon next to this episode on your podcast app or on your computer. To listen to other episodes, search online for Go Beyond Disruption podcast. You'll find us on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, even on your smart speaker, where, by the way, the magic phrase to use is play a podcast. Go Beyond Disruption. From the AICPA and CIMA Home Office in London, I'm Kyle Hannon. We'll be back soon with more conversations that help you and your profession to go beyond disruption, whatever it is. Till next time, keep listening and keep safe. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Disruption, brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. Learn more about today's topic at AICPA-CIMA.com/disruption. This podcast is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered and does not represent an official opinion or position of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants or any of its subsidiaries or affiliates. It is provided with the understanding that the association, its affiliates, and subsidiaries are not engaged in rendering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The association, its subsidiaries, and affiliates make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to and assume no responsibility for the content or application of the material contained herein and expressly disclaim all liability for such damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material.